When Christmas became real for me, I understood the concepts that I had heard. I could believe that Jesus was the Son of God. I could believe that God loved us. At least I hoped. I wanted to believe that God loved us enough to make it possible to have a relationship with Him and have things made right, have all the mistakes and all the bad decisions and all the things that were contrary to Him, that were unhealthy for life, become real. Become a real relationship and become real forgiveness and become a real ability to navigate life. Christmas became real. But in that same moment, I recognized I didn't have a decision-making paradigm. I didn't have a process. I didn't have a worldview by which to know how to implement that in my life. And as I sought to discover that, the words from the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans were shared with me. Paul wrote to the Romans in Romans chapter 10, if we confess with our mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised Him from the dead, then we will be saved. But I wasn't sure how to do that. How do I confess with my mouth? How do I believe in my heart? How do I make this substantive and real and an act of faith? That same passage goes on to say and explain that the reason this process happens is because when we believe in our heart, it's credited to us as righteousness. That faith transfers us to a position of righteousness, from unrighteousness to righteousness. And the confession, the acknowledgement of that, is the process by which we are saved. And that anyone who makes that decision, anyone who walks that process, is never put to shame. And in that same passage in Romans 10, it tells us that it's available to everyone, that there are no specific races or backgrounds or people who qualify for this. Anyone who wants to make that decision to believe in Jesus would be saved, would be forgiven, would be rescued. And also, in that same passage, there was a promise that anyone who would make this decision would never be put to shame. And truthfully, I never have been since I made the decision, and I'm not sure there's a decision out there that you can guarantee shame-free. Any number of decisions we make could result in shame, could result in guilt, could result in heartache. But God's promise was that a decision to trust Him wouldn't put me to shame. But I still didn't know how to do that. And so it was explained to me that I should think of my heart as a place of authority, as a place where decisions are actually made, where it moves from rational and logical to the depth and the significance of a decision that will absorb my whole life. And that my heart should be viewed as a throne room. And in this throne room, like any throne room, it's a place of authority, it's a place of control, it's a place of guidance, it's a place of leadership. And that throne sits there, and somebody must sit on top of that throne. Up until the point when I trusted in Jesus, I sat on that throne. I made all my own decisions. I made I chose every direction in my life. I chose everything I was going to say, everything I was going to think, everything I was going to do, everything that I had planned. I was on that throne. I was the ultimate authority in my life, and everything was about me. The problem is that had resulted in a lot of bad decisions and a lot of mistakes and a lot of heartbreak. So it was explained that if I go to that throne room and I remove myself from the throne and put Jesus on the throne, put him in that place of authority, he now will do everything that I've been doing. He will make decisions for me. He will guide my life. He will lead me. And most importantly, as the king of my life, as the authority, as the decision maker of my life, he will not only guide me, but he will walk with me and secure me, even all the way past this life into heaven. And so I did that. I physically got on my knees, although that wasn't required. But in that decision-making process, I said, okay, I'm going to confess with my mouth Jesus is Lord. I'm going to believe in my heart that he is the Son of God and that he's real and that he's Lord. And I'm going to look for that righteousness. I'm going to experience knowing him. I'm going to trust that he's not going to put me to shame. And I'm going to believe those words of the Apostle Paul, that anyone who makes this decision will be saved. And I asked Jesus into my heart. I told him, I want you to sit on the throne. I've made mistakes. I've sinned. I want to be forgiven of that. I want to have a new hope. I want to have a new direction in my life. I want to know Jesus. I want Jesus to be in control. And what I realized very quickly after making that decision, that my invitation to let Jesus sit on the throne of my life, in the heart of my life, was received. And that's in fact where Jesus would now reside and live in me. I would love to tell you that all these years after that decision has been made, that Jesus always sits on that throne, but there's still enough rebelliousness in me that every once in a while I become convinced I can make better decisions. I have a better idea of where I want to go. I have better plans than God does. And I'll struggle and I'll fight a little bit. At the end of the day, every time that's happened, it's resulted in heartache, it's resulted in brokenness, and I've come back and said, no, things work better when Jesus is on the throne. So whether you make that decision for the very first time today and say, yes, it makes sense to make Christmas real and ask Jesus to be a part of my life, be forgiven and secure for all eternity, that makes sense. In making that decision for the first time today, you'll not be put to shame. You will be saved, you will be forgiven, you will have a relationship with God, and I believe he will validate that in the days to come. If you're like me and you struggle every once in a while with the rebelliousness, just take heart. He loves me just as much now as his child as he did before I was his child. And he understands my feeble attempts to take control, and he continues to allow me to confess, allow me to be forgiven, and allow me to acknowledge things work better when Jesus is king. Always my king.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of our family today. Be sure to stay connected with us throughout the week. You can find us online at fbctomball.org, as well as any of our social media platforms. If you have any questions, prayer requests, or need someone to talk to, please send an email to ministry@fbctomball.org. We are praying for you today and hope that God has met you where you are.